He opened an alien crate for food, but a child looked up and asked, "Father." The alien crate was old, weathered, chipped, and covered in layers of dust. It had been sitting in the corner of the deserted market for what felt like years, its origin a mystery even to the seasoned traders who'd come from all corners of the galaxy. There was no sign of the owner anymore, just the crate and its strange, cryptic markings, symbols that no one on this barren, forgotten moon could decipher. Jacob's fingers itched as he examined it, his eyes scanning the faded metal, hopping for something useful. He wasn't a scientist, but he was a resourceful mechanic, and sometimes when the galaxy gave you junk, you had to make it into something useful. Besides, food was scarce here on the edge of the Empire, and he'd be damned if he didn't scavenge every bit of opportunity he could find. He pulled out a crowbar, its edge digging into the side of the crate with a screech of metal. The sound was deafening in the silence of the abandoned market. His breath quickened in anticipation. Inside, it was mostly empty, save for a few sealed packages. He cracked one open. His mouth watered as he saw the contents. Food, real food, not the tasteless ration packs he'd been living on for months. This was a godsend. As he reached in, the package shifted slightly, and a small object rolled to the side, smooth, metallic, and glowing faintly. His heart skipped a beat as he picked it up. A device of some kind, small enough to fit in the palm of his hand, but somehow it felt wrong. Before he could inspect it further, there was a soft sound, a rustle like a breath. He froze, eyes darting around the dimly lit market. Then it came again. This time it was clear. The noise wasn't just the wind. Something was moving inside the crate. Jacob felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He slowly, cautiously inched closer. His breath caught in his throat as the lid opened further. And that's when he saw it. A child, an alien child, barely more than a toddler, curled up inside the crate, with wide, bright eyes staring up at him. It took a moment for Jacob's brain to process the sight. He hadn't expected this, hadn't anticipated an alien in the crate. But the real shock wasn't the child itself. It was the words the child spoke next. "Father." Jacob's pulse raced. His mind couldn't make sense of it. He didn't even know how to respond. He wasn't a father. He didn't even know if this was a biological child of any species, let alone his own. But the look in the child's eyes, innocent, confused, and terrified, cut through the confusion like a knife. The child's voice was faint, fragile, but it hung in the air like an echo of something deeper, something primal that Jacob couldn't quite grasp. And yet something in him stirred. The child had called him father. Jacob's mind raced. His pulse thudded in his ears. What was this? What did it mean? He stood frozen, unsure how to proceed. Then the child spoke again. "Are you my father?" The words sent a shiver through him. But before Jacob could respond, the ground beneath him trembled slightly. He looked up, alarmed, and saw a shadow moving across the horizon. He hadn't noticed before, but he wasn't alone in the market anymore. There was a figure watching him from the shadows, tall, cloaked, and unmistakably alien. Its eyes glowed faintly, almost predatory. It didn't move, but it didn't need to. It was waiting. Waiting for something. Jacob felt a lump form in his throat. He knew this wasn't going to end well. The child, who had been silent for a moment, suddenly gasped, a strange, choked sound. Her hand reached out weakly toward Jacob as though sensing something. "Run," she whispered. Jacob didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the child in his arms, heart pounding in his chest. The crate, the food, the strange, glowing device, all forgotten as he sprinted toward the exit of the market, the alien figure's eyes following his every movement. Jacob's boots hit the cracked pavement of the deserted market with a harsh echo as he sprinted, the alien child cradled in his arms. His heart pounded in his chest, every breath a struggle, as adrenaline surged through his veins. His mind was a blur, filled with questions he couldn't answer. Who was this child? Why had she called him father? And who, or what, was the cloaked figure watching them? The child, barely more than a bundle of fragile limbs, felt unnaturally light in his arms, like a ghost. Her breathing was quick and shallow, her eyes wide and terrified, but she didn't scream or struggle. She just clung to him, her tiny hands gripping his shirt with an almost desperate force. "Hold on," Jacob muttered under his breath, pushing his legs harder, racing through the winding alleyways that lined the market. He had no destination, no plan, just the instinct to run. The alien market stretched out in every direction, abandoned and eerie under the twin suns of the alien world. The towering, jagged buildings loomed over him, their designs unlike anything he'd seen before. The architecture was both ancient and futuristic, twisting in strange angles that seemed to defy the laws of gravity. It was beautiful, but in the most unsettling way. His eyes flicked back toward the distant figure that had been watching him. It was still there, standing unmoving in the shadow of a building. It hadn't followed, yet, but Jacob could feel the weight of its presence as though it were waiting for the right moment to strike. The child stirred in his arms, her voice a hoarse whisper, barely audible over the sound of their hurried footsteps. "You have to get me away from them." "Who?" Jacob panted, his legs burning as he pushed through another narrow alley. His mind raced to make sense of what was happening. "The ones who sent me," she said. "The ones who—" She stopped, her eyes darting around as if she'd said too much. Jacob didn't wait for her to finish. He pressed on, his mind running through every possible escape route. There had to be somewhere safe on this planet, a place to hide. But he was no expert in alien terrain. He had been a soldier once, but that had been a different life. He was a mechanic now, trying to survive, trying to scrape by. Survival didn't always come with clear instructions. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps reached his ears and his instincts kicked in. Someone was following them. Not the cloaked figure. This was something else, something much closer. A squad of armed figures appeared at the far end of the alley, their silhouettes cutting through the dim light. They were humanoid, but their features were sharp and angular, their skin a pale, ashen color and their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Jacob didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. He ducked behind a series of crates stacked along the alley, pulling the child close to his chest, trying to hide their presence. The soldiers passed by, their footsteps steady and deliberate, like predators hunting for prey. Jacob held his breath, every muscle in his body tense, hoping they wouldn't stop to check behind the crates. A few seconds felt like an eternity, but finally the soldiers moved on, fading into the shadows. Jacob exhaled, his heart racing, and slowly, cautiously, he emerged from behind the crates. The child's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but there was something else in them too. Recognition. A strange, unreadable look that made Jacob uneasy. "They're not the ones I'm afraid of," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Jacob's brow furrowed. "Then who?" She didn't answer, her gaze shifting to the distant horizon where the cloaked figure still stood. Its eyes glowed brightly now, and Jacob knew that whatever this was, it was far from over. He turned and started running again, this time with more urgency. He had to get to the outskirts of the city, find shelter, and figure out what the hell was going on. But the more he ran, the more the feeling of being watched intensified. As they rounded a corner, the ground shook again, this time more violently. The air vibrated with the low hum of energy, and a massive ship appeared overhead, blocking out the twin suns as it hovered silently above the market. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The ship was unlike anything he'd seen before, sleek and metallic, its surface shimmering in a way that suggested advanced technology far beyond anything he could comprehend. It descended slowly, casting long shadows over the city below. The child's eyes widened in horror as she twisted in his arms, her voice shaking. "They're here." Jacob's stomach turned. Whoever they were, it was clear that this wasn't just a simple rescue mission. This was something much bigger. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into, but he knew one thing for sure: the stakes had just escalated. The ship's engines hummed louder, and the ground trembled beneath Jacob's feet. He glanced around, trying to find a way out, but there was nowhere to hide. The child's grip tightened on him. "They're coming for me," she whispered. Jacob's mind raced, and in that moment he made a choice. "Stay with me," he said, his voice low and determined. "I won't let them take you." He wasn't sure how he would stop them, but he knew one thing. If anyone was going to stand in the way of these aliens, it was going to be him. As the ship landed with a deafening thud, Jacob took a deep breath, preparing for whatever was about to come. The ship's massive doors hissed open with a sound that vibrated through Jacob's bones. The air around him seemed to pulse with the energy from the craft, and for a split second, everything went still. No more footsteps, no more distant sounds, just the hum of that alien vessel. The child stiffened in his arms, her small form trembling. She wasn't crying, but Jacob could feel the fear radiating from her, even through the layers of clothing that separated them. She looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes, her small fingers still tightly gripping his shirt. "Don't let them take me," she whispered urgently. "I won't," Jacob said, his voice low but firm. He didn't know who they were. He didn't know why she had called him father. But in that moment, something deep inside him stirred, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just going to let her be taken by these strange, powerful beings, not without a fight. As the ship's ramp lowered, Jacob took a deep breath, clutching the child even. He didn't have a plan. He didn't even know where he was running, but he couldn't stand there waiting to be captured. His mind raced for options. Then a voice broke through the tension, soft, alien, but not hostile. "Do not be afraid." Jacob's body froze, his hand instinctively moving toward the blaster at his side. The voice hadn't come from the ship. It came from one of the figures who now stood at the base of the ramp, their presence towering in the dim light. She was tall, much taller than any human, with a graceful, almost regal bearing. Her skin was a pale silver, with faint, shimmering patterns running along her arms and face. Her eyes were luminous, glowing softly, and when she spoke, Jacob could feel the weight of her words, like they were embedded in his very soul. "Please," she continued, "we mean you no harm." Jacob didn't trust her, not one bit. His hand tightened on the blaster, but he didn't draw it yet. The child in his arms stirred, her eyes locking onto the alien woman. "Who are you?" Jacob demanded, his voice steady despite the fear that churned in his stomach. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced down at the child, her expression softening. "She is of my people," she said quietly. "We have been searching for her." The child, who had been quiet for a moment, suddenly gasped and pushed away from Jacob's chest. She reached toward the woman with trembling hands, a mixture of fear and hope in her eyes. "Mother," she whispered. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. The child had spoken the word mother, as if she had recognized the alien figure, but her voice was hesitant, uncertain. The alien woman knelt in front of them, her movements fluid and deliberate. "Yes, child," she said softly, her voice a soothing balm to the terror that had taken root in the child's eyes. "I am your mother." Jacob's mind raced. He had no idea what was happening. He wasn't even sure what to believe anymore. The child had called him father, yet this alien woman was claiming to be her mother. The truth seemed to be slipping through his fingers like sand. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus. "What do you want with her?" Jacob demanded, his voice barely above a growl. The woman's gaze shifted to Jacob, and for the first time he saw a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "We have come to take her home," she said. "She is our princess. She is the key to saving our people." Jacob felt the weight of her words settle on him like a cold stone. A princess? The child, her daughter, was royalty. And what did she mean by the key to saving our people? Jacob's mind reeled. The woman stood up, her movements graceful yet purposeful. She extended her hand toward the child. "Come, my dear," she said softly. "It is time for you to return home." The child hesitated, looking up at Jacob with an expression of confusion, fear, and something else, something like longing. For a moment, she looked as though she wanted to reach out to him, but she slowly pulled her hand back. I don't know you," the child said, her voice barely audible. Jacob's heart clenched. The child had been so terrified moments ago, but now she was torn between the stranger who claimed to be her mother and the strange human who had protected her. The silent weight of the moment pressed on him. "Why are you telling me this?" Jacob asked, his voice cold and demanding. "You want her back, but why me? Why did she call me father?" The alien woman's eyes softened as she looked at him. "It was not by accident that she called you that," she said. "Your presence, your actions, they have all been guided by a force much greater than you realize. She has been sent to you for a reason." Jacob frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The child," the woman said, her voice growing more urgent. "She is the last hope for our species. The war we face is unlike anything you can comprehend. We have been searching for her for years, and you—" She stopped, her eyes flickering with something that almost looked like fear. "You have a choice, human. You can help us, or you can stand in our way." Jacob's mind spun, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just trying to survive." The woman's gaze hardened, her eyes burning with intensity. "Survival is not enough anymore, not for her, not for anyone." Jacob's grip on the child tightened, but he could feel the uncertainty in her, the confusion, the fear. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. Finally, the child turned to Jacob, her small hands trembling. "Will you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded with meaning. Jacob looked at her, this small, fragile creature who had called him father, who seemed to trust him more than he trusted himself. He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing: he couldn't walk away from this. Not now, not when the stakes were this high. He looked back at the alien woman, his resolve hardening. "What do you need me to do?" The woman's lips curled into a faint but hopeful smile. "We need you to protect her," she said, "and together we can save us all." But Jacob wasn't sure if they would be able to protect her from what was coming. Whatever war this was, whatever threat loomed over them, it was clear that it wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was a matter of saving everything. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest as he absorbed the alien woman's words. The weight of them pressed down on him, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. Protect her, save them all. It all sounded like some kind of impossible mission, like the sort of thing that only heroes could accomplish. But he wasn't a hero. He was just a man, a mechanic, an ex-soldier barely scraping by on a dying planet. The child, still clinging to him, looked up with those wide, pleading eyes, waiting for his response. Jacob's grip tightened around her tiny form, as if trying to hold onto the reality that had just been turned upside down. "She's just a child," Jacob said, his voice low and filled with confusion. "How can I protect her? How am I supposed to save your people when I don't even know what's going on?" The alien woman's expression softened as she stepped closer. "You don't need to understand everything. You need to understand this: she is the last of our kind. Her existence is tied to the survival of our people, and her power is the key to ending the war." Jacob felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. A war? Power? He had never signed up for any of this. He was just trying to survive, trying to stay under the radar and keep his head down. He wasn't prepared for something this monumental. But as the child's soft breath tickled his neck, as she trembled in his arms, Jacob felt something deep within him stir. The way she had looked at him, trusting him despite everything, it was enough to make him question everything he thought he knew about himself. He wasn't just protecting her because she needed help. She had reached out to him. She had called him father. "Please," the child whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Help me." Jacob looked down at her, his heart aching. She was so small, so vulnerable, and yet there was something undeniably powerful about her, something he didn't understand. The alien woman's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You have a choice, human. If you help us, we can end the war, bring peace to our people. But if you refuse, we will be forced to take her by force. And I'm afraid that even with your skill, you won't be able to protect her then." Jacob's eyes snapped to the woman, his jaw tightening. "So you'll force me, is that it?" The woman didn't flinch. "No," she said, her voice calm and resolute. "We do not wish to force you, but you must understand time is running out. There are those who would stop her from fulfilling her destiny, and we cannot let that happen." Her words hung in the air, a heavy warning that sent a chill down Jacob's spine. Who were these people? What was this destiny they spoke of? And why had the child chosen him, of all people, to protect her? The child shifted in his arms, her little hands clutching at his jacket. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered. "I won't let them hurt you." Jacob swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking into him. The child was offering him reassurance, offering him trust. How could he turn his back on that? How could he walk away when she was depending on him? He met the alien woman's gaze, his face hardening. "You say you want me to protect her, but how do I know I'm not just a pawn in this war? How do I know I'm not just being used?" The woman's eyes softened once more. "You're not a pawn, but you're more important than you realize. You have the power to change the outcome of this war. You may not understand it now, but you will." Jacob didn't know what to say to that. The war, the power of the child, it all seemed too much for him to comprehend. But the woman's words rang in his mind. She wasn't asking him to be a soldier. She was asking him to protect her. The child, the princess, his daughter. The word tasted foreign on his tongue, but there was something undeniable about it. He felt a pull, a responsibility that transcended logic, transcended the chaos of the moment. This child needed him, and he wasn't sure if it was fate or some twisted cosmic joke, but he knew he couldn't walk away. "I'll protect her," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of questions in his mind. "But I need answers. I need to know everything." The alien woman nodded, a flicker of something, perhaps approval, perhaps something else in her eyes. "Very well, come with us. We will take you to the heart of the resistance. There you will learn what you need to know." Jacob glanced down at the child in his arms. She was still looking up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. He nodded to her, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "We'll get through this," he said quietly, and though he wasn't sure what this was, he meant it. The woman's eyes gleamed with something like relief. "You are stronger than you realize, human. Now come, we don't have much time." Jacob shifted the child in his arms and followed the alien woman as she led him toward the ship. The child didn't resist. She clung to him, her small fingers grasping his jacket as they walked. The world around them was alien, strange, and unrecognizable, but for the first time since Jacob had found the child, he felt something other than fear. He felt purpose. The ship's doors slid open before them, revealing a cold, sterile interior. It was sleek, efficient, and impersonal. But as Jacob stepped inside, a sense of finality settled over him. There was no turning back now. He was in this, whether he liked it or not. The child nestled closer to him, her tiny body trembling. He held her, his resolve hardening. No one was going to hurt her, not while he was still breathing. The alien woman gestured toward a seat. "We will begin the briefing soon. There is much to explain." As Jacob sat down, holding the child close, the woman began to speak, her voice a soft hum that filled the silence of the ship. "Our enemies are not what they seem," she began. "They have infiltrated our society, manipulating us from the shadows. The child you hold, she is the last of our royal line, and she is the only one who can stop them." Jacob's mind raced, but he stayed silent, letting her speak. Whatever came next, he had made his choice. There was no turning back now. The ship hummed beneath Jacob as it ascended into the alien sky, leaving behind the desolate landscape of the forgotten market. Outside, the twin suns of the planet cast long shadows across the city, but within the ship's cold, sterile interior, time seemed to stand still. It was an uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic hum of the engines. The child, still cradled in his arms, had fallen silent, her tiny form resting against him as if seeking comfort in the midst of everything that had happened. Jacob's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one trying to make sense of the fragments of information he had been given. A war, a royal bloodline, an alien race depending on him. None of it made sense, yet he knew he couldn't afford to ignore it. The alien woman, who had introduced herself as, led the way to a small chamber at the rear of the ship. Inside, it was more like a command center, filled with holographic displays and advanced tech that Jacob couldn't even begin to understand. Figures moved in and out of the room, some humanoid, some entirely alien in form. All of them seemed focused, determined, working on something that Jacob wasn't privy to just yet. Motion for Jacob to sit at a central table, where a holographic display flickered to life before him. The child, still tightly held in Jacob's arms, seemed content for now, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Tell me what's going on," Jacob said, his voice firm. "Start from the beginning, I need to know everything." Didn't hesitate. Her eyes, though still glowing faintly, were filled with the weight of everything she had endured. She began speaking, her voice calm but laden with urgency. "Thousands of years ago, our people were the guardians of a powerful energy, an energy that allowed us to create, to build, to protect. But as with all things, greed and ambition led to our downfall. A faction of our kind, corrupted by the desire for power, began to abuse the energy we controlled. They were called the—" Jacob's eyes narrowed. "I've heard of them, they're the ones causing the war." Nodded, a sad look crossing her features. "Yes, they are led by an individual known as he seeks to control the energy, our energy, so that he can reshape the galaxy in his image. He has already destroyed several of our colonies, and now he's coming for the rest of us. We are the last of our kind, and we will not survive unless we stop him." Jacob felt the weight of her words. This wasn't just a war between factions, it was a fight for the very survival of an entire species. But what did that have to do with the child in his arms? Why had she called him father? Continued. "The child you hold, her name is, and she is the last descendant of the royal bloodline. Her blood carries the key to the energy we once controlled. She is the only one who can stop but the key to unlocking her power lies in her understanding of who she is and what she is capable of." Shifted slightly in Jacob's arms, her eyes flickering open. She looked up at him, her small face full of uncertainty. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice small and fragile. Jacob swallowed hard. The weight of her question crushed him. How could he answer her when he didn't even know the answer himself? But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her down. He wasn't going to let anyone else use her, manipulate her. He had promised to protect her, and he intended to keep that promise. Stood, her posture regal despite the sorrow in her eyes. She must go to the temple of. It is a place of power where the ancient energy is stored. It is there that we'll learn how to harness her abilities, how to control the energy within her. Jacob's mind raced. A temple, ancient energy? This all sounded too much like something out of a myth, something that couldn't possibly be real. But then again, nothing about the past few days had felt real. A royal alien child, a ship, a war, none of it made sense. He looked down at, she was watching him, her eyes wide, waiting for him to say something, anything. "How do we get there?" Jacob asked. His eyes darkened, and she paused. "It will not be easy. The temple of lies beyond the controlled territories, in a region we have not been able to reach in years. To get there, we will need allies, and even then, the journey will be perilous. There are forces within the who will stop at nothing to ensure does not reach her destiny." Jacob's blood ran cold. Forces that would stop at nothing. He had a feeling that meant more than just a few gunfights. "How long do we have?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Not long," replied. "His forces are closing in on our last stronghold. The longer we wait, the less time we'll have to prepare. We need to move quickly." Jacob's mind went into overdrive. He had no idea how to fight in a war between alien factions. He was a mechanic, a soldier once, but that didn't mean he could save an entire species. And yet, as he looked down at, something inside him hardened. She was depending on him. He wouldn't fail her. "I'll do it," Jacob said, his voice steady. "We'll get her to the temple. We'll stop I won't let them win." Nodded, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. It was almost as if she didn't believe him. "We will all need to be ready," she said quietly. "But first, we need to gather our allies. You may not realize it now, but the war has already begun, and the choice you've made, whether you know it or not, will decide the fate of this galaxy." Jacob didn't fully understand what he had agreed to, but there was no turning back now. He had promised to protect, and for better or worse, he was in this fight until the end. As the ship's engines roared to life, lifting them into the stars, Jacob could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. But deep down, he knew that whatever came next, he couldn't fail. Not now, not with depending on him. And he wasn't sure how he was going to do it, but he would fight. He would protect her, and he would stop The ship surged forward, faster than anything Jacob had ever seen, its sleek form cutting through the vast emptiness of space. The hum of its engines was steady and unyielding, like the heartbeat of some ancient creature, alive with purpose. He sat in the small, cold chamber, still curled in his arms, her small body now warm and settled against him. The last few hours had been a blur. Everything had changed. One minute he was a scavenger, clinging to whatever scraps of survival he could find, and the next he was a protector thrust into the middle of an intergalactic war that he didn't understand. The child had come into his life without warning, without reason, and yet he knew now that there was no going back. The war she was part of, the power she carried, it was bigger than him, bigger than anything he had ever imagined. As the ship navigated through the stars, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was a quiet, unnerving sensation, like the calm before a storm. He wasn't sure if it was the weight of the situation, the looming danger of or the constant, overwhelming presence of the alien woman who was now guiding their journey. But he couldn't shake it. Stirred in his arms, her little hand reaching up to touch his face. Her eyes were still filled with confusion, but there was a small flicker of something else now, something like hope. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible over the hum of the ship. Jacob's heart clenched. He wasn't sure how to comfort her, how to explain that he was just as scared, just as lost as she was. But he knew one thing for sure, he wouldn't let her face this alone. "You're safe with me," he said quietly, brushing a stray lock of her hair out of her face. "I won't let them hurt you." Her small fingers gripped his shirt, and she nodded, although her eyes still held a deep well of fear. It was then that Jacob realized something else, wasn't just a child. She was carrying the future of an entire species, and her every decision, her every move, was more crucial than he could possibly understand. The weight of it was almost unbearable. Just then entered the room, her footsteps silent on the metallic floor. Her eyes, glowing faintly, looked at them with something akin to gratitude. But there was no time for pleasantries. The mission they were on was too urgent. "We are approaching the rendezvous point," said her voice calm, but there was an edge to it now. "We need to prepare. Once we land, we will meet with our allies. You will be introduced to the resistance. They are our only hope." Jacob nodded, his eyes narrowing. "And who exactly are these allies? How do we know we can trust them?" His gaze hardened. "The resistance is made up of those who have not been corrupted by this influence. Some are former soldiers, others are scientists, engineers, and even civilians who have lost everything to this regime. We've fought alongside them before, but they are scattered, fragmented. It will take time to unite them, but it's our only chance." And Jacob asked, his voice low, "What's her role in all of this?" His eyes softened as she looked at the child, who had fallen silent in Jacob's arms. "She is the key, Jacob. The energy she carries within her is unlike anything or that can control. It is ancient, predating even the first records of our people, but only can unlock it. And to do that, she must first understand her heritage, her power, and what she is truly capable of." Jacob's mind whirled. He hadn't signed up for any of this. He was just a man trying to survive. But now here he was, a protector of a child who was the last hope of an entire species. It felt too much for him, too far beyond his reach. Yet as he looked down at her innocent eyes looking up at him, something deep inside him stirred. He couldn't back out now, not when the stakes were this high. "All right," he said, standing up and gently shifting in his arms. "Let's meet these allies. We need to get to the temple and end this war." Nodded, "It will not be easy, but you've made the right choice. Together we may still have a chance." As the ship moved toward its destination, Jacob couldn't help but feel the gravity of the moment. The fate of entire worlds, civilizations, and species was hanging in the balance. But there was something else that gnawed at him. The forces that were closing in on them. They were not just a military threat. They were a force of manipulation, lies, and fear. And Jacob knew that if they didn't stop them, it wouldn't just be people who would suffer. It would be the entire galaxy. The ship finally broke through the atmosphere of the planet they were heading toward, descending into a dense forest landscape. The trees here were massive, unlike anything Jacob had ever seen. They reached up toward the sky in twisting, spiraling patterns, their bark gleaming with an iridescent glow. The ground beneath them seemed alive, pulsating with energy, as though the planet itself was aware of their arrival. Jacob's stomach tightened as the ship touched down, the landing smooth but filled with an undeniable tension. This was it. They were no longer in the quiet safety of space. They were on the ground now, in the midst of whatever war was to come. Stood up first, her expression hardening. "Stay close, Jacob. Trust no one but the resistance. These are our people, but they are wary. It is up to you to prove yourself." Jacob nodded, his hand instinctively tightening around who was still curled in his arms. She had fallen asleep now, her tiny form warm and relaxed against him. He could feel her breath against his chest, steady and soft. As the ramp of the ship lowered, the cool air of the planet's surface rushed in, carrying with it the scent of alien vegetation. It was fresh, but there was a strange undercurrent to it, something primal, something that warned him not to trust everything around him. Several figures stood waiting for them at the edge of the landing site. They were humanoid, but clearly not human. Their skin was dark, almost like the bark of the trees around them, and their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. They were armed, but the tension in the air was palpable. They were waiting, studying Jacob and the child. One of them stepped forward, a tall man with sharp features and an air of authority. He regarded Jacob with a critical eye, his gaze briefly flickering too. "You are the one they call the Protector?" he asked, his voice deep yet not unfriendly. Jacob nodded, not sure what else to say. "I'm here to help." The man's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you've stepped into, human. This is not just a war. It is the last battle of our people. If you're going to be a part of this, you'd better be ready for what's coming. Because once you cross that line, there's no turning back." Jacob's stomach churned, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. Not now, not with depending on him. "We're ready," he said, his voice steady. The man studied him for a moment longer before nodding. "Then come with us. There's much to be done." As they began walking toward the encampment, Jacob glanced down at who was still sleeping peacefully in his arms. Whatever happened next, he had made his choice, and there was no turning back. The encampment was a far cry from the sterile, high-tech ships and stations Jacob had grown used to. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood and the earthiness of the planet, and the sounds of distant chatter and clanging metal filled the air. The resistance had made a temporary home here, hidden deep within the forests of this alien world. Massive trees rose above them, their leaves shifting in the breeze, their light filtering through in shimmering green beams. It was beautiful, but also dangerous. Jacob kept his hand close to who had finally awakened, her wide eyes absorbing the strange sights around her. Despite the events of the past days, she was still the same child he had promised to protect. She looked up at him with trust, with hope, and it made the responsibility heavier with each step. They walked into the heart of the camp, where a group of resistance fighters were gathered around a large table. Maps and holographic images flickered in the dim light, showing regions of the planet, scattered resistance cells, and the movements of the leader of the group, a woman with sharp, calculating eyes and a commanding presence, stood as they approached. Her uniform was simple but practical, suitable for survival in the rugged terrain, but there was an undeniable authority in the way she carried herself. She had the air of someone who had seen the worst of wars and had learned to survive it. She said, her voice low but firm, "You've brought the child." Nodded, motioning for Jacob and to step forward. "This is Jacob. He's the one who has agreed to protect her." The woman, whose name Jacob learned was Captain Nara, looked Jacob up and down, her eyes sharp with suspicion. She didn't seem to trust him, and Jacob could hardly blame her. He was a human, a stranger in their midst, with little to offer in terms of experience with their war. But the fact that he had made it this far, through the battles, the betrayal, and the chaos, meant something. "Protection," Nara muttered, her gaze moving from to Jacob. "That's what we're all after, isn't it? Protection from madness, from this insidious grip. But just because you're holding her now doesn't mean you can walk away when it gets tough, human." Jacob met her gaze with an intensity he hadn't felt in years. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "I promised I'd protect her, and I'm going to keep that promise, whatever it takes." Nara studied him for a moment longer before nodding once. "Good, then listen up. We're not just dealing with a war of weapons and armies. His forces, they control more than just territory. They control people. They manipulate, they deceive. And the only way we're going to win is if we can get to the temple of, that's where her true power will awaken." Stepped forward, her eyes softening as she glanced at. "But we don't have the time to waste. Knows we're here. He's already sent his forces to the surrounding area. We'll have to move quickly." Jacob felt a tightness in his chest. The urgency in his voice was enough to shake him to his core. This wasn't just a race against time. This was a fight for survival for all of them. As Nara pulled up another holographic map, Jacob scanned it, nodding the markers indicating strongholds and the paths they would need to take. It wasn't going to be easy, and Jacob knew that. But now, more than ever, he felt the weight of his responsibility. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about it was about saving a people he barely understood. "Jacob," Nara said, snapping him from his thoughts, "we'll need to move through the forests, bypass the outposts, and make our way to the temple's hidden entrance. But there's a problem." She paused, her face tightening. "There's a group of scouts coming through this area. They're likely looking for us. We need to eliminate them before we can move forward." Jacob glanced down at, who was holding onto him tightly. Her grip was small but firm, as if she knew something important was about to happen. "We can't afford to wait," Jacob said, his voice low but filled with determination. "Let's take them out." Nara gave him a sharp look. "You think it's that simple?" "I'm not saying it's simple, but I've been in situations like this before. I know how to handle myself," Jacob replied, his tone firm. Nara's lips tightened as if considering his words. "Fine," she said after a long pause. "Then we'll do it your way, but don't expect it to be easy." The plan was simple: infiltrate the scouts, neutralize the threat, and move forward. But as they ventured into the dense forest, Jacob could feel the weight of what they were about to face. This wasn't a regular mission. This was the beginning of something far larger. His presence in his arms reminded him of everything they were fighting for. She was still just a child, fragile and vulnerable, but in her, they held the key to victory. And if they didn't make it to the temple, the consequences would be devastating. They moved through the forest in near silence, the only sounds the soft crunch of their boots against the ground and the occasional rustle of leaves. Jacob kept a tight grip on, aware that every moment they spent in enemy territory increased the risk of being spotted. And Nara led the way, while Jacob brought up the rear, watching their surroundings closely. The deeper they moved into the forest, the heavier the silence grew. It was unnerving. It was as if the whole planet was holding its breath. Suddenly, a faint rustling broke the silence. Jacob's heart skipped a beat as he motioned for the group to stop. He could hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, too many for a small group of scouts. Nara motioned for them to take cover behind the thick trees, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. "We'll need to take them out quickly and quietly. No alarms, or we'll have reinforcements here in minutes." Jacob nodded, adjusting his position so he could keep a close eye on. He wasn't about to let anything happen to her. He had promised. From the dense foliage ahead, the scouts appeared, their figures silhouetted against the dim light filtering through the trees. They were humanoid, but their features were sharp and unsettling. Their eyes gleamed in the darkness, scanning the area with mechanical precision. They were armed, but they hadn't spotted them yet. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his breathing steady. He had one chance to make this right. Nara moved first, swift and silent, taking down one scout with a clean shot to the chest. Followed suit, neutralizing another in a blur of motion. Jacob waited for the right moment. As one of the scouts turned toward their hiding spot, Jacob made his move. He lunged forward, using his weight to knock the scout to the ground, his hand quickly silencing the shout that tried to escape from the alien's throat. In the next few seconds, it was over. The scouts were taken out with deadly efficiency, but Jacob's mind never stopped racing. Every fight was a reminder of how much more there was at stake. "We need to move," Nara said urgently, pulling them back into motion. "We'll know we're here now." They didn't have time to waste. With their enemies neutralized, they pressed on, deeper into the forest. And as they did, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead. They were closing in, and the temple's only hope was still far away. The journey to the temple had been brutal. Each step deeper into the forest felt heavier, as if the weight of their mission was pressing down on them with each passing moment. Jacob had grown accustomed to the tension that hung in the air, but it didn't make it any easier. With each encounter, whether it was a skirmish with scouts or a near miss that had them on the run, he felt the stakes grow higher. Had changed, too. She was no longer just the frightened child he had promised to protect. As they traveled, she began to ask more questions, her voice growing firmer, more confident. She wanted to understand what was happening. She wanted to understand her role in it all. But Jacob still didn't have all the answers. All he could offer her was reassurance, and even that was becoming harder to give. The night they arrived at the edge of the temple it was as if the forest itself had sighed in relief. The trees here were ancient, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their roots wrapping around massive stones that jutted out of the ground like ancient sentinels. The air was thick with the energy of the place, an undeniable pulse that seemed to hum in Jacob's chest, making his heart beat faster. The temple stood before them, its massive stone archways towering above them like the remnants of a forgotten civilization. The carvings on its walls were unlike anything Jacob had ever seen, alien symbols, with intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the dim light. Stepped forward, her expression softening as she looked at the temple. "This is where it all began, the energy of our people. The power carries within her is tied to this place. It's where she will awaken to her true potential." Jacob looked down still held tightly in his arms. She was exhausted, her eyes heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. But there was something else in her gaze now, something like purpose. She was ready. She had to be. "Are we too late?" Jacob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They were not far behind them. He could feel it like a looming shadow. "No," replied, turning toward him. "We have time, but not much." Suddenly a sound broke the stillness, the unmistakable hum of ships in the distance. Jacob's heart sank. They were here. Forces had found them. They were too close now. "We don't have time," Jacob said, his voice harsh. "We need to get her inside now." Without waiting for a response, Jacob turned and began moving toward the entrance of the temple. Followed closely, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. But it was too late. A low, menacing voice echoed from behind them. "Stop right there." Jacob froze, his body tensing as he recognized the voice, the unmistakable cold, commanding tone of. The leader of the was here, standing at the threshold of the temple, flanked by his soldiers. His eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light as he took a step forward, his presence overwhelming. His armor gleamed, dark and imposing, and his entire being radiated power. "I've been looking for you," said, his voice low and dangerous. "I've been hunting you, and now here you are hiding behind a human." Shrank back in Jacob's arms, her small hand clutching at his jacket as if she could hide from him. But Jacob wasn't about to let that happen. He wasn't going to let take her, not without a fight. "I won't let you have her," Jacob said, his voice steady but filled with defiance. His hand was already on the blaster at his side, but he knew it wasn't enough. They were outnumbered, and had far more power than he could ever hope to face. Laughed a cold, humorless sound. "You think you can stop me, human? You're nothing more than a tool in this game, and you will fall like the rest." Jacob's fingers tightened on the blaster, his jaw clenched, but he didn't fire. He wasn't going to give in to fear. Not now, not when was depending on him. "You'll never control her," Jacob said, his voice ringing with defiance. "You won't control anyone ever again." His expression darkened, and he raised his hand, signaling his soldiers to move forward. But before they could take another step, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the temple. It was like the very ground beneath them had come alive, thrumming with energy as the ancient power of the temple began to awaken. Gasped, her eyes wide as she looked up at Jacob. It's calling me," she whispered. Jacob didn't know what was happening, but he could feel the energy pulsing around them, filling the air with a strange, electric hum. It was the power of the temple, ancient and primal, and it was awakening in. "No," shouted, his eyes wide with fury. "You cannot control it, you cannot control her." But it was too late. The temple's energy surged, and its body began to glow with an otherworldly light. She lifted her hands, and the ground beneath them trembled. The air around them warped, and the power that had been dormant for so long was now fully unleashed. Jacob stepped back, his eyes wide in awe as transformation took place before him. The child who had once been afraid, unsure of her power, now stood tall and powerful, her small form radiating energy that could reshape the fate of entire worlds. His eyes glowed with the same light that filled the temple, and then, with a voice that echoed through the very ground beneath them, she spoke. "I am the last of my kind, and I will end this war." In that moment, everything changed. The soldiers faltered, fear creeping into their ranks as the power of the temple surged around them. Tu seemed taken aback, his face twisting in a mixture of anger and disbelief. "No," roared, his voice breaking with frustration. "This isn't possible." But it was happening, was more than just a child. She was the key to everything. The power that had been lost to her people for centuries was now awakening, and she had the strength to wield it. With a final, decisive gesture, his hands shot forward and the ground beneath cracked open. The energy from the temple enveloped him, pulling him into the depths of the earth, as if the very planet itself had rejected him. The forces scattered, their morale shattered in the face of the power that now wielded. And just like that, the battle was over. Jacob stood in awe as lowered her hands, her body still glowing with the temple's energy. Her eyes met his, filled with a quiet, unspoken understanding. "We did it," Jacob whispered, his voice full of disbelief. Nodded, her small form now more confident, more resolute. "We did," she said softly. And as the echoes of battle faded into the distance, Jacob realized that the war was over. But their journey was just beginning. With by his side, they had not only stopped they had changed the fate of an entire galaxy.